Okay, so welcome to the June edition of our webinar series. And this is a webinar series that Simone set up for our Level 7 diploma students who are currently studying with us. And today we've got Vivienne Robinson. And Vivienne is a health coach, a nutritional therapist, and obviously has a huge interest in sport. And she's going to be working through the topic of fasting within a sports performance element. Fasting is a very emotive topic. It's been around for a long time, and it's due some serious airtime in my consideration. A lot of people do it. A lot of people become unstuck by it health-wise. A lot of people use it to their benefit. So the term hype, help or harm is a good one. Um, Slide two, Vivian. Okay, so just to tell you, before I hand over to Vivian, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the Level 7 diploma. It's one we started just under 2 years ago now. We've got our first lot of people very close to the end now. It's our flagship program. It's a Level 7 diploma, which means the equivalent of a master's degree postgraduate program without the thesis at the end. We deliver it fully online, and we've got students. I call them students, but every single one is a practitioner in their own right as well. Okay, next one, please. We have two long base modules, which we share with the certificate course that we run, which is integrative sports nutrition, and then applied performance nutrition, and then four short specialty modules. These are 1 month specialty modules. And then we have a practical mentoring and case studies module, plus then the design and implementation of a research project. Okay, next point. It's open to individuals with a university degree or level 6 qualification or relevant professional qualification and experience. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Vivienne now. She'll present with you, ask you some questions, hopefully stimulate some good chat. There'll be space at the end for a Q&A, so let's get into a discussion on this one because it's not a cut and dry black and white subject. Okay, Vivienne, over to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate the introduction and the context of black and not being black and white, because if you've come hoping for a clear answer at the end, there may be more questions than answers, but let's see. This session is going to be evidence-based. It's going to be interactive, so I hope that you'll be able to interact through the chat box. And most of all, I really hope that there'll be some practical takeaways. So, as Ian said, fasting has become a really hot topic in the world of nutrition, full stop, not just sports performance. For longevity, for metabolic health, and for sports performance. And as with any hot topic, there's research, there's loud voices, and there's opposing views. So I have a friend who is a slave to everything that Instagram tells her to do for her health and well-being. And she messaged me a few years ago and said, please help me. What should my fasting window be? And that's when I realized that this was, this kind of new kind of trend in nutrition that, people were feeling kind of forced into. And it was in all of those little pop-up boxes whilst you were in your various browsers saying, click on here to find what your fasting window should be. So I think because since it's gone mainstream, we've got movie superhero Chris Hemsworth, who was in a series with Peter Attia focusing on longevity. And it features an entire episode on a 4-day fast. In the Huberman Lab, we had Andrew Huberman promoting fasting for weight loss, for improved metabolism, and supporting exercise schedules. Meanwhile, opposing views on a female approach have hit the bookshelves, with Dr. Mindy Peltz telling us to fast like a girl, and Dr. Stacey Sims saying women shouldn't train fasted, not even going for a walk. Confused? I am, and that's why I decided to explore this topic. So before we dive in, I just wanted to give you a quick introduction to myself. As Ian said, I'm a sports nutrition diploma student, which is an area that I really wanted to understand more about after graduating as a nutritional therapist. From a work perspective, I see clients one-to-one, and I work with the Health Improvement Commission and the Farm Shop here where I live in Guernsey. I take a food first approach, and I'm really passionate about quality whole food that has been produced sustainably and with care to the environment. From a sports perspective, I played competitive netball until I had kids. And now I do a variety of different exercise, but probably my greatest contribution to sport is driving my kids to and from the pool, all the other courts and fields that they play on, and making sure that they've got food in between all of their training sessions. So I'm going to start by asking you a question. I would love to know if you have tried fasting before, and if we can open up the chat box, and then for ease, if you want to just type in the number rather than the words. Have you tried fasting before? 1, yes, regularly. 2, occasionally. 3, no, but I'm curious. And 4, no, I'm not personally interested, but you may be interested, perhaps for clients or family or friends. So if you feel free to pop your answers into the box. And Ian, I've realized I have no visibility of the chat function.
Okay, so we have a 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 3, and then but not anymore. And then a 4. So a good mix.
Amazing.
Apart
Yeah,
from 3.
brilliant. Well, I mean, that's probably why you're all here. You've either tried it, you're curious about it, and you'd like to know a little bit more. So it's great to understand a little bit more about where you're at before we dive in. So thank you. I really appreciate your feedback there. So let's start at the beginning. Why are we even having this conversation about fasting? Why has it gained so much momentum in the sports performance sphere? So, research suggests that fasting has a potential to influence multiple aspects of performance, including training quality, recovery, body composition, and that could be weight loss and or muscle to fat ratio, and also long-term health. Secondly, let's get clear on what fasting is. And I think, as you can see from this slide, it absolutely isn't one thing. So, fasting is defined as the voluntary abstinence of some or all foods and beverages for therapeutic, spiritual, or political reasons. And then we can further subcategorize these into time restricted eating, also known as time restricted feeding. And this is an eating pattern that has a dedicated eating window with a defined number of hours. So 16 hours fasting with 8 hours feeding is quite a common one. We've got the warrior diet, which takes it to a bit more of an extreme with 18 hours of fasting, 6 hours of feeding. A little bit further with 20 hours of fasting and 4 hours feeding. Then we take it to an even further extreme with the 1 meal a day, where it's 23 hours of fasting and 1 hour of feeding for the 1 meal. And then if we pull it back a bit, there's the overnight fast, which I think has perhaps come out of the more kind of more extreme views and into the, let's give our bodies a rest from eating by fasting overnight. Then we've got intermittent fasting, which is a dietary approach that alternates between periods of feeding and periods of fasting. where typically the fast lasts no longer than 24 hours. The 5-2 is probably one of the most kind of best known examples, where there's 2 days where the calorie intake is severely restricted, and then 5 days of eating normally. And ideally, those 2 days wouldn't be consecutive. And then that, as with all of these, you'll find that there's kind of extremes of, various protocols. The eat, stop, eat is a similar principle, but no calories are consumed on the 2 days of fasting. Then we've got prolonged fasting. So this is a water only fast of 4 to 7 days. And that's what was seen in the Chris Hemsworth series. Then we've got elimination fasting. So this is where kind of eliminating specific food groups or focusing on different areas. So we've got a water fast, so water only, juice fast, which is juice only, and then we've got a dry fast, which is no food, no fluid. And I mean, this has been a fascinating process. There's a hard dry and a soft dry. Now, the soft dry allows you to have a shower or a bath or a swim, whereas the hard dry doesn't allow you to come into contact with water at all. And then I think it's really important to pull out religious fasting, particularly Ramadan, where that fits under the alternate day fasting and includes refraining from food and drink from sunrise to sunset during the holy month. So I'd like to get you involved again and understand, your thoughts on why people fast. What benefits are they hoping to experience? So feel free to pop your thoughts into the chat box. As I, love to know, what you've heard, what you're interested in, what you perhaps may have experienced.
Okay, better body composition, weight loss. I'll throw in insulin support, fat loss, longevity, weight loss, improving metabolic flexibility. Is that all you've got, folks? Mental sharpness. Thank you, Jenny. Okay, I think we're drying up.
Okay, amazing.
Definitely a weight and body composition focus there.
Yeah. Brilliant. We're obviously all in sync because I'd kind of pulled together a few thoughts from the research, and quite a few of those are overlaps. So brilliant. We're all starting on the same page. So yes, body composition. So whether that's weight loss or fat loss. And then metabolic health is a big one. And this could include insulin sensitivity, and how efficiently our body is managing the response to glucose. Also lowering cholesterol, particularly triglycerides and LDL. And these two can be the result of metabolic flexibility, and the body's ability to be able to switch between glucose and fat as energy sources. Longevity, yep, that's another one that came up. So delaying aging and age-related diseases, primarily by keeping reactive oxygen species under control. Performance adaptation, if we keep it on a sports focus, through the creation of new mitochondria, our cells, little powerhouses, and also through autophagy. So the spring cleaning of our cells, which can help to reduce inflammation, which is supporting muscle recovery and adaptation after training. And then again, we've got brain health, this kind of mental clarity. So fasting acts as a mild stressor. That in the switching of glucose from glucose to fat for fuel increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which can result in improved neuroplasticity, so helping to improve those synaptic connections that support learning and memory, which is also really important in kind of sports performance, as we're kind of training our mind as much as we are our kind of body and muscles. Again, it's promoting the spring cleaning of old and damaged cells, specifically in the brain, reducing neuroinflammation, and supporting stress resilience by becoming more resilient to oxidative stress. So, what is actually happening during fasting that could be exerting these benefits? These timings give us an approximate timeline of the processes happening during fasting, but the research offers different timings, and we can't hold tightly to these because ultimately we are all unique. We're all individual, and we're going to respond slightly differently based on a number of different factors. So if we start at the beginning, when we're in the fed state, our bodies are using carbohydrates as the main fuel source. So I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm teaching you to suck eggs with this bit, but after we've eaten, our blood glucose is rising and triggering the release of insulin. The glucose released from our food is first used for energy by our body and brain, with the remaining stored in the liver as glycogen. So it's effectively like putting leftovers in the fridge. When we then move into a transition state where our blood glucose and insulin levels fall, when we need it, the metaphorical fridge door to the liver is opened and glycogen is released to stabilize blood glucose levels, and is the energy source for our muscles and brain, kind of continuing on so that 0 to 12 hours. But then once the glycogen stores have been utilized, metabolic switching kicks in as fat becomes the energy source from adipose tissue. Triglycerides are broken down into free fatty acids and glycerol that over prolonged fasts, the liver converts into ketone bodies and glucose. So fat being broken down and used as an energy source sounds like a win. Here's the but. If fasting is prolonged, especially alongside exercise or inadequate calorie intake during that exercise, the body may increase protein breakdown to provide amino acids for energy and essential functions. This is particularly relevant for athletes as recovery and muscle adaptation rely on sufficient energy and protein availability. So the body is highly adaptable and can switch between fuel sources effectively. However, when we're thinking about this in a sporting context, the goal is not simply survival or fat burning. It's about optimizing performance, recovery, and adaptation. So how does this translate into training? Very simply, fasted training may lead to fat oxidation, but equally it may decrease training intensity. Whilst fed training can lead to increased quality and performance. So we've looked at the theory, but let's have a look at what the research is telling us. So this is a systematic review looking at the effect of intermittent fasting on sports performance. And the conclusion was intermittent fasting does not have a negative impact on sports performance, whether that's aerobic, anaerobic, or strength and power. And then the benefits that were seen were improved body composition, so reduced body weight whilst maintaining lean muscle mass, which is important. Improved glucose, improved insulin sensitivity, regulating glucose and fat metabolism, improve the adiponectin levels, reduce systemic inflammation, and enhanced immune function. So it's showing that there's a lot of the benefits that we highlighted earlier that everybody was pulling out. And that's what's been observed in these studies. But when it comes to sports performance, the headline is, it doesn't have a negative impact on performance, which is not quite the positive statement that we're looking for, because we don't want to just go, oh, it doesn't make it worse, because with sports performance, we want to make it better. So if we have another look have a look at another systematic review and meta-analysis of the effect of intermittent fasting on physical performance and exercise outcomes. The headline again is intermittent fasting does not exert a significant impact on key physical performance indicators, whether that's strength, anaerobic capacity, perceived exertion, or cardiovascular response. So again, we've got some non-significant decreases, we've got some non-significant increases, but the overall message is it doesn't make it worse, but it's not making it better. And then within this systematic review and meta-analysis, they actually found contradictions between the studies as well. So adding to the confusion, and again, this lack of clarity. So as with any research, there are limitations, and these are almost amplified in these systematic reviews. And in trying to identify the effect of fasting on sports performance, it almost seems like the more studies they include, the more variables are identified and included within those studies. So if we think about participant heterogeneity, there is an array of ages, a mix of genders, athletic proficiency differed. So it ranged from amateur athletes to professional and elite athletes. The weight range varied as well, from being a healthy weight to overweight and obese. There were geographical variants, which are significant because of climate, daylight duration, and altitude. And as we identified earlier, fasting is not one thing. So fasting timings and methodologies varied significantly. Some of them included caloric restriction. Some of them included pre-fast protein or carbohydrate loading. And the study length differed from short term to medium term to long term. And then when it came to the performance indicators, I didn't even list those on the slide. It's easier to group it into the kind of aerobic, anaerobic, strength and power, but there was cycling, running, jumping, grip strength. And, to be honest, the whole presentation could be taken up really with all of the different measures that were kind of listed and assessed within those studies. So how do we make any conclusions from the research when the variables differ so wildly? As with most research papers, you get to the end and the research concludes that further research is required. And this is absolutely the case. And it just really highlights the fact that without controlling the variables and then repeating them in multiple studies, we kind of really lack clarity of impact. So when we're just looking at the highlights, we don't know specifically, what gender, what age, what activity they've been participating in. So there's a real kind of level of caution with the research and a real need to dig deeper to see what it's saying. So with this range of variables, we have to remember that context is key. And whilst I love Nike's inclusive definition of an athlete, that is, if you have a body, you are an athlete. When it comes to fasting, we need to be a little bit more defined. So the impact of fasting on sports performance in a recreational athlete differs wildly from the impact in a highly competitive or elite athlete. And that's due to the difference in energy requirements and the training and competition demands of duration, intensity, and frequency, which, like I say, just differ significantly from a more amateur athlete. So that's a really strong consideration to take either personally or for clients. So we've looked at the potential benefits of fasting, but it's also important to be aware of the potential side effects. And now for some, these may be transient as the body adjusts to a different pattern of eating. For others, these could be ongoing concerns, which is why it's really important to consider the long-term impact of fasting And so why those research studies that look at the long-term impact, would be able to kind of highlight whether there were any of these side effects and the potential amount of time that it takes to be able to overcome them or recognize that it is your body's response. So those side effects can include headaches, tiredness, low blood sugar, which is particularly significant in those with thyroid conditions. It could be an inability to focus. It could be an overcompensation during the feeding window. Very low body fat can impact menstrual cycles, either regularity or stopping them altogether. And let's not forget the fear of missing out. If we are not able to socialize because it's outside of our eating window, that's having a pretty significant impact. And we often underestimate the importance of human connection and social experiences, which often have food at the heart of the occasion. And making food a barrier could have much wider impacts on the health and well-being of the athletes. So if we take a step further beyond side effects, fasting could be more harmful than helpful. And this is a list which is pretty long, but not completely exhaustive, of contraindications. And I just want to highlight a few in relation to our focus on sports performance today. For those athletes who are training twice a day, they'll likely have significant energy requirements that may not be able to be met within a specific eating window, and certainly not in the more extreme fasting protocols. And I think for healthcare providers on this call, if you suspect your client has REDS, so relative energy deficiency in sport, similarly to fasting, it may hinder the ability to fulfill their energetic requirements if they are restricting the time with which they are eating in. It's also important to recognize that for those with current, previous, or potential eating disorders or disordered eating, fasting may provide an opportunity to set an eating window that can exacerbate restrictive behaviors. So it's an area to address very sensitively, but and cautiously, but very mindfully. And then I also want to highlight the concern around age, and particularly young athletes, and those that are feeling under pressure to be a certain size. They need to be consuming enough food to support not only their athletic endeavors, but also support their physical and mental development. So making sure that they are having sufficient energy intake is just so important to help them through that and to have a healthy relationship with food. I don't know what it's like with you, but it is super hot here. So I'm trying to keep myself hydrated in between talking. So just a few other considerations that I'd like to highlight, kind of specific areas within fasting. So the female body responds differently to fasting, which is an important consideration when much of the research has been carried out on men. The female body can perceive the lack of energy consumption as a stressor and downregulate estrogen and progesterone, which can impact the menstrual cycle, hot flushes, sleep, and fertility. And it's thought that this is effectively, this time of famine, that the female body is going into protective mode, not to become pregnant, so that they can reserve their energy sources. And as fasting is a stressor, it's promoting the release of cortisol, which has the counterproductive effect of promoting fat storage. So if you or you're working with a already highly stressed individual, adding another stressor perhaps isn't the best strategy. I want to be really clear that I'm not saying that fasting isn't for women. I think it's just that we need to be more cautious in our approach, and not go in with those extreme fasting protocols to start off with, and to kind of tread a little more carefully. Again, the period of Ramadan is really important to recognize. It involves fasting from food and fluids, which in a sporting context is really significant, increasing the risk of severe dehydration, which could potentially lead to muscle cramps and impact thermoregulation. And without food, it's harder to sustain the intensity of a hard training session or event. So I think it's really important that we're mindful and we recognize the physiological impacts of those observing Ramadan during the holy month. And then we can't talk about anything without really considering genetics. Regardless of our lifestyle, our genes are influencing our response to fasting through appetite, fat storage, circadian rhythm, and insulin sensitivity. So it means that for some, fasting is going to feel really easy and they're going to experience the benefits very easily. Whilst for others, it's going to leave them feeling more hungry and may even promote fat storage. So we can't ignore our genes and the role that they play within our personal, unique response to fasting. So does this diary look familiar? It's full. I can certainly identify with this one. Whether it's work or training, whether it's our own commitments or fulfilling the needs of others, we all have unique schedules and we need to have sufficient energy to give them our all. So this is when we need to consider the rigidity of something like a 12 till 8 p.m. fast. So this would be the 16-8 protocol. So if we've got somebody who's on a 12 till 8 fast, that is training at 6 o'clock in the morning, going straight to work, and then they've already done half a day's work before any food even passes their lips, perhaps not going to be the best strategy for them. And so this is where it may be more beneficial to shift our focus towards nutrient timing. So here's the view of the International Society of Sports Nutrition on nutrient timing. The timing of energy intake and the ratio of certain ingested macronutrients may enhance recovery and tissue repair, augment muscle protein synthesis, and improve mood states following high volume or intense exercise. So it's a subtle shift to support the body and brain's energy requirements before, during, and after training. So before training, it's going to support the intensity that we're heading into. During, it's going to support the output whilst we're actually training. And then after supports recovery and adaptation. And delaying food intake can delay recovery. But after an intense or long session, we're going to require glycogen replenishment and protein for muscle repair. I started to write out a few ideas, and then I realized that I would be heading off into a whole other webinar just with this one slide. So I've held back because exactly what we need will be completely individual. It's going to depend on the other meals that we've consumed and the duration and intensity of the session. So, this is something that, we look at within the diploma and is, I think, a real game changer. So that's been a massively helpful part of the diploma learning that I've had so far. So I think in identifying whether fasting is the right strategy, we first have to ask the right question. And I don't think that should start with, what should my fasting window be? I think it's perhaps better to ask, what is my goal? These are a few thoughts, but I think, really to kind of summarize, if the answer to that question for you, what is your goal? If the answer is performance driven, then focusing on nutrient timing may be the most effective strategy. However, if sport is part of a wider goal to improve metabolic health and body composition, then fasting may be beneficial in more amateur athletes, in more kind of recreational sessions and low intensity sessions. However, If it's during competition and high intensity training, then again, the focus is perhaps best placed on nutrient timing. And I think it's really important to highlight at this point that we never start anything new during a comp or in the run up to a competition. This is absolutely something that would need to be a kind of very established kind of eating strategy before kind of heading into a competition. So, research on fasting appears to be favourable when considering changes to physiology. That was kind of fairly consistently seen in the research that we looked at. However, we don't really know what the mechanism of action is there. It could be because of caloric restriction, as we saw. Different studies looked at different strategies. So, some of them were around caloric restriction, some of them were around protein loading, carbohydrate loading before training. Um, but some of them also looked at the quality of food being consumed. So I think it really highlights that it's not just necessarily about the eating window, but having a kind of a much bigger picture on what's being consumed and how much is being consumed. Sorry, I was a bit trigger happy there. And is as is nearly always the answer in nutrition, context is everything. We've explored the potential benefits, we've looked at the potential side effects and some of the contraindications. And we've seen that the research is inconclusive because there are so many variables and we are all unique. So I think it's really important that we dig deeper when we see headlines or we hear influencers talking about specific protocols. That may be what they found has worked for them in the case of influencers, or the headlines may just be kind of feeding into a product that they're trying to push or a program that they're trying to promote. So I think we really need to kind of dig deeper into the research to understand where they're getting those headlines and protocols from. And it's about being mindful of yours or your client's health history, their lifestyle, their goals, and just considering all the many guises that fasting takes. And that, if you're wanting to start fasting, then maybe an overnight fast is a positive place to start. And there's kind of plenty of positive research on that one being a kind of a more gentle but kind of very physiologically positive approach. So finally, can't do this without using the word integrative. So we need to look at the bigger picture. We need to consider the different aspects of our life that are also going to be influencing sports performance. What is our hydration looking like? What's our sleep like? How and where are we spending our time? Whether that's work, whether that's relationships, whether it's other commitments. And I wanted to just end by highlighting that really fasting is just one strategy within our nutritional choices. And as I've mentioned before, research has shown that actually the quantity and the quality of food we eat is just as significant as the time that we're choosing to eat it in. So that may have answered some questions. It may well have highlighted a whole heap more questions. And it looks like we've got some time to be able to spend the rest of the session just being able to, explore some of those questions. But I hope that there's been some useful insights, hopefully some practical takeaways. And as always, with nutrition, some food for thought. So thank you for bearing with me. I suspect you're all in pretty hot conditions too. So thank you.
Thank you, Vivienne. That was an excellent overview, introduction, posing of questions for the fasting topic. It was very clear that there are no direct answers to this. The key context is Context is everything is really important, and the individualization that you spoke around. So I'd like to invite any of you in the audience to come and ask questions, share points of view, um, share case studies, share individual experiences, because I think we've got a nice opportunity with so many, intelligent and exploring people online right now that we can take this a little bit further as well. We've got 15 or 20 minutes left still. Vivienne, you can drop the slides now if you like. Okay, who wants to go first? Who's got experiences that you'd like to share, positive and negative or mixed? And also feel free to unmute. Are you all ready to go away for your dinner now? So while you're picking up your courage to unmute, I'll share some of my experiences. For me in my clinic, I would absolutely mirror what you've said, Vivienne, in terms of the mix of people. You'll get maybe somebody who's a little bit overweight, who's recreationally active, and fasting works wonderfully well. And then you'll get the stressed out individuals who are trying to use it, who are maybe holding on to a bit of body fat, but they're maybe holding on to it because of adrenal and thyroid imbalances, which affect the insulin stability. And then when they throw fasting on top, it becomes another stressor. And that can actually deepen the metabolic imbalance that they're experiencing. So in some cases, just gently introducing a good quality, again, like you say, quality of food first, but a good quality of breakfast can make a difference to a lot of people. And also some of the research I've read around fasting, it can be better to, start your day with good food and then to end your day a little bit early. So having that evening on a low intake. Because something I say to my clients is, well, you need the energy in the morning, you need that energy in the afternoon, but unless you're at some club, doing hard training in the evening, you don't necessarily need it in the evening. So that's when you can slow down a bit. Okay, questions, folks?
Hi, Ian. It's Amanda heading here. So, all right for me to jump in?
Absolutely. Do you want to put your
Yeah.
camera?
Oh, have I not got in? Hold on. There we go. Hopefully you'll be able to. Oh, there you go. Hopefully you'll be able
Good.
to see me at some point.
Yeah,
And
good
I
to see
thought
you,
that.
Amanda.
Hi, nice to see you. Thank you very much for that, Vivienne. That was really good. Um, just on the point that you were saying, a lot of clients will say to me, it's far easier not to eat in the morning because they're busy. They want to start their day feeling lighter. And actually, at night is when they come together with the family and they sit down to have a meal. So asking them to not eat as much or not eat a bigger meal is more difficult for a lot of people because of how their sort of day is structured.
Yeah, I think it's a real balancing act, isn't it? The kind of embracing everybody's needs within a family, you suddenly realize that, it goes far beyond, food preferences and likes and dislikes into actually what is, needed within the day. And I know I had a friend who was kind of entering perimenopause, and she found a way of adapting that. So when her husband and her daughter who were, super hungry and needing, a big meal, a big kind of injection of carbohydrates at the end of the day, she was doing pasta for them and then doing some courgette for her. So I think it's finding those kind of subtle tweaks to be able to help. And it is that kind of that FOMO. It's a really important part of the day when you come together as a family. And so it's finding those tweaks of how you can still take part, still eat together and celebrate together, but just do it in a way that works for you individually. But
Yeah,
I think that's
yeah.
a really good point.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it is, having the swaps coming in there is easy, does make it easier. And just getting people to get their heads around that rather
Yeah,
than saying just because you live together, we have to eat the same things. And it goes back to what you're saying from an individualized point of view. We're not the same. Men are not women, and we're doing different things, and we have different energy needs throughout the day. And also depending on our sort of our life stage and our life cycle at that point as well, irrespective of our training demands as well.
yeah, absolutely. And I think the other really important point you were saying about not wanting to kind of eat at the beginning of the day, sometimes then when people start eating, they're so hungry, they just kind of keep going. And then it kind of pushes, you have dinner and then it's like, oh, I'm just going to have a little bit of dessert, or I'm just going to have a snack. And so it just kind of pushes that whole window out almost kind of unknowingly. So yeah, I think it's just nudging clients, isn't it? Just
Yeah.
towards just
Yeah.
having a little bit earlier on to kind of support that evening food choice.
Yeah, and I think you've sort of mentioned I know it's been called the halo effect. I haven't had much earlier, so I'm allowed to have something else. And I find that going back to what we're saying about really looking at the quality of your food and the nourishing aspect of the food, I start seeing that people are limiting their food and then actually they're snacking on really poor quality things because they haven't had breakfast or because they've done a training routine, and therefore they deserve it or they've earned it. And it's getting them out of those sort of thought processes. We don't want to restrict food. We want to nourish our bodies with food.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of quality aspect just comes up time and time again, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Vivienne. Thank you.
Hi, Jenny.
That was great. Um, just really from a bit of a personal perspective, even as a nutritional therapist, having done fasting in the past, um, I found it difficult to get enough food then throughout the rest of the day, and that's knowing about food. So I can only imagine there are a lot of people out there who have no idea how much they're missing out on by not eating as regularly as they could be doing.
Yeah. And I mean, I know we talked in our group as well about this, the kind of the importance of um, supporting our bodies after training with food as well. So, that timing aspect is just so important, isn't it? As well as having enough, it's also, if we're not seeing the results from all our training because we're not supporting our bodies with, the right food at the right time,
Yeah,
it's so tricky. And I think, I've had conversations with people, kind of I'm thinking of a friend who was in her 60s, and she said, oh, my son, who's in his early 20s, um, told me that I should fast. I should just have coffee in the morning, because it works really well for him. So, he said I should do that. And so I think it's just that context of how our body's changing over time, and also recognizing who we're taking, advice from
yeah,
is also
definitely.
really important. Thank you, Jenny.
I'll just add into something Jenny sort of said that prompted something in my mind. I talk to my clients about not fueling the body with food, nourishing the body with food. And when you work integratively and you do the functional testing, that you'll often find nutrient deficiencies in people who are not calorie restricted. So if we then add in an element, whether that's through fasting, whether it's through a caloric restriction, you then add the challenge of getting enough nutrients in for the support of that body in the context of where they live with the life stressors and maybe pollutants as well, supporting detox pathways, creating enough antioxidants, and then obviously training demands on top of it. So it's not something that should be taken lightly if somebody does fast. They need to be thinking about how they do that. And just adding on to what Amanda was saying about, the evening pattern, if you're and you were saying, yeah, you can just keep adding on because you haven't eaten earlier in the day. You can end up going to bed with still a lot in your stomach that's not digested properly. And then because you're going to bed with a heavy stomach, you'll get up in the morning not feeling hungry. And then it keeps you in that cycle of just the coffee in the morning.
Just on that note as well, Ian, thank you. I was going to say that I know it depends what you're doing it for, but that situation that you've just described, somebody eating way into the night, they never actually reach a proper fasted state. And I think people often misunderstand that there has to be quite considerable hours, again, depending on your own genetics and your digestive system. But you can think you're fasted and you're actually not. It just means you've not eaten for a while, but you're still in very much a postprandial state and you're still absorbing nutrients. So in terms of some of the benefits that we suggest you might get from fasting, you never get there. You never actually you never actually benefit from those things.
So we've talked about some of the things to be careful about with fasting. Vivienne, just to pose you a question, if somebody does want to do some kind of fasting, how will you go about supporting them? Would you have some kind of intermittent suggestion or, how do you fit it into their lifestyle? What questions would you ask them?
Yeah, I think that word lifestyle is absolutely key because it's understanding, where is where are your greatest energy requirements? I think because there are some protocols that are quite specific on times of the day, maybe 16:8 could work for you, but it has to start earlier in the day rather than later in the day. So being able to understand an individual schedule where they have most energy requirements, whether that's physically or mentally, and being able to support, the eating timings around that. I think it's also really important to understand stress levels, because we've seen that, we can keep somebody in that same, that kind of same stress state by adding another stressor with fasting, whereas it could be, potentially a positive stressor in the right person who has, the capacity and perhaps, a little bit of weight to lose where they're, looking to gain that, kind of metabolic health aspect. So it's really delving into their health history, their lifestyle, understanding what they've tried before, what their patterns are, and understanding whether, I think that kind of eating disorder or disordered eating aspect is really crucial to be able to have a sense of whether this could be used in a more kind of harmful way, by being more restrictive. So yeah, I think you've got to be really inquisitive, kind of really delve into that health history, really delve into that lifestyle. And if you're not sure, then starting with that 12-12 can be a good place because, as Jenny said, potentially if you're kind of eating later, you're not actually digesting it, then you're never really getting into the fasted state, and then it's impacting your sleep overnight. Your liver's still working hard on, the kind of detoxification element rather than the more kind of cleansing activities that it's supposed to be focusing on during the night, which then, poor sleep is going to then impact. So it's really having that kind of very integrative approach to what is going on in somebody's life as a whole.
Thanks, Vivienne. Navita asks, any thoughts on the Prolon diet every 3 to 4 months? Is that something you've read about?
I haven't come across the Prolon diets. Do you have any
Navita, would
more
you like
information?
to share some more on that? You can unmute or just
Yeah,
type something in.
I don't have too many details. It's the one where they It's they try and put you in a sort of more of a ketogenic state. It's only 5 days. You're still having something during the day, but the idea is also that you maintain muscle mass. You don't lose that. There's a lot of scientific evidence for it. Like they did a lot of research on it. Fasting mimicking diet. That's the word.
Yes, I was about to say, I think this, yeah. Um, yeah, no, I have come across this, and I think again it kind of comes back to what your goal is. And I think, particularly from a sports performance context, maybe this is something to try outside of an intense kind of training period, or leading up to competition, to see what impact it has, on your body, in that kind of perhaps more off season. Whereas once it gets into the more intense phase, it could be impacting your training output at a really critical point, and influencing that kind of recovery and adaptation. So, again, it's kind of goals and individual approach, and context. But yeah, maybe off season for an athlete, it could be an interesting one to try to see whether that has a positive effect.
Thank you.
Ian, would you agree with that? Have you got any experience?
I I mean, I'm a big fan of trying anything if it's not extreme. So if it's only every few months for a few days, that's absolutely fine. And as Vivienne said, learn from it. It's when it becomes a daily pattern that you have to get it right. So I like the phrase intermittent fasting, and I'll always tell my clients, well, the word intermittent doesn't mean every single day. So you could plan your week, and I love the phrase periodization in a sporting context, which gets used for training. But you can use it to think about your eating as well. If Sunday is a quiet day for you, well, don't eat half the day. Go for a gentle walk with your other half on the beach. That's a nice thing to do. But then Monday morning you're flat out busy and training hard again, then you need to maybe feed, or at least consider feeding that.
Sorry, it's Amanda
There you
again.
go, Amanda.
I have used the Prolon diet, and I have had clients that have used the Prolon diet. I've used it because I like to know what I'm suggesting to people. So I, like to have a little bit of experience with something. Um, and it's a very, I would say that it is a very useful and convenient way for somebody to kickstart eating less. It's designed for the calories to be less throughout the 5 days. So sort of days 3 and 4, you're at your least calories, or it would be calories, I suppose. And then on day 5, you have a little bit more. So it is supposed to, yes, mimic fasting without putting you into a deprived state, or the body into a deprived state. They say it's natural food. It's very packaged. It's bars and soups, and I found it quite tedious towards the end of the 5 days. And I would definitely not recommend it for anyone that is doing training at all. I think it's great, as I said, to kickstart a process and being a bit more disciplined around food. Um, but it's certainly not food as we would discuss it in terms of colourful, nourishing things that you look forward to eating.
Okay, so we can learn from the the approach, but then make our own food, in other words.
Yeah.
That's
Vivienne,
really interesting. Thank you, Amanda.
Vivienne, any last things from you?
Um, I mean, I think the only thing that we can say is that context is everything when it comes to fasting. And we just have to be open to it for ourselves, for our clients, and then just use it mindfully if that's what we choose.
I love your key terms. We've got mindfulness now, we've got individuality, and we've got context. So that's brilliant. I'll just mention hormesis as well because fasting is a type of hormesis, so a mild stressor to the body, as Vivienne said. There's other types of hormesis, like training is a hormetic load. Cold exposure is a hormetic load. And just like everything that's hormetic, there's an inverted U. There's a point you can go up to a point where it's good for us, and then you tip over that point and it starts not becoming so good anymore. So I think it's finding that sweet spot for each individual. And metabolically, we're so different. I'll often tell my students and clients about the stories of when I used to cycle in South Africa, and I would be having the breakfast and a sports drink on the bike and then a recovery shake straight after. And you'd have people that would just have a coffee at the start, go for 3 hours just with water, and then have a coffee afterwards. But they metabolically were different. They were very good fat metabolizers. And you get such extremes with individuals. So therefore, as practitioners, we need to be quite clever as to who are we working with and what are their needs. Okay, I think we're done. So Vivienne, I want to say a big thank you for you. That was a brilliant presentation and it threw up a lot of good questions. We've had some good discussion, and we'll leave this recording up for people to view as well afterwards. And we would love comments and feedback. So thank you, and good night.